Hello, welcome to the Barksdale virtual experience that's going to walk you through how to do the American Involvement in War essay. The intention of this tutorial is though that if you are confused or need extended learning or are absent, this will provide you with instructions so that you can successfully complete the essay task that is required of you. Just a reminder that this is a culmination of our units of looking at Americans' involvement in wars, the World War II, early Cold War, and that includes branches of the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So everything that we've been doing over the past month is going to kind of be put together into the driving question that we've been looking at, which is how does war impact opportunity? So everything that you're doing will answer that question. So what I'm going to do is literally just walk you through the directions. This will be a little longer than normal for tutorials. So I would encourage that you don't listen to it all the way through. Maybe listen to segments and ask if there are any questions based on those segments and then move on to the next. If you listen to it all the way through, you might get fatigued and my voice might become monotonous and lose its impact of giving instruction. All right. So just a quick thing for this essay, its completed outline and essay are due next Wednesday by 11:59 p.m., which is February 15th. Step one of your process is really what we're going to be working on in class this week, which is going to be digging through evidence, classifying that evidence based on what kind of opportunities were impacted, and determining how it answers the question. Now, because the question is open ended, when you examine and classify your types of opportunities, you can determine that it was both positive and negative. Unlike the final question, which makes you take a side, this question allows you to actually explore both sides. And if you do, you're in your thesis, you would say World War II, Vietnam, impacted, and then classify your types of opportunity in positive ways, in negative ways, or both. So it's really important that if you have at least even one positive, you need to make sure that you specify positive or negative in your thesis, both of them. Because if you miss that, that will impact your grade based on Comp 1 when you do your analysis statements. All right, so step one of the process is finding your evidence. You're actually going to go through your evidence and you're going to determine what types of opportunity you want to focus on. We're going to go through class by looking through old papers, worksheets, handouts, everything that we've been collecting over the past 4 weeks in preparation for this, and kind of put it into making sense. Those worksheets that you find, there's a list of them below that I'm going to talk about in a second. As you find pieces of evidence, you'll highlight and circle. It's important that you classify it. What I mean by that is in the directions right here in blue, you're going to notice that it says you're going to classify with things such as social, psychological, economic, political, technological, military. You could say educational, you could say physical. Just a reminder, I will be asking you to branch out with your classifications. I don't want you to classify the same thing over and over and over. It will get monotonous and repetitive. So I will require that for at least each war section, you have different classifications specified. And we purposely have been looking at a broad spectrum of them so that you are better able to prep for that part of the test. As a reminder for definitions, social would have to do with things such as class, race, or gender. Psychological has to do with the way that events impacted the way people's mental states or feelings. Economic usually has to do with some impact on financial circumstances or money. Political has to do with government, entities, laws being passed, etc. Technological would be anything dealing with technology, advancements, hurting, thinking about the atomic bomb. Military would be practices with the military soldiers, etc. You could also add in the word judicial, which I know we looked at when we thought about Cold War era impacts on cases like Dennis versus the United States and elements like that. Okay. I do specify that you do not need to add the names of the wars to your thesis. You do need to add your classification and your positive or negative, but you do not need to add the names of the wars because you will add those as part of your proof statements when you go to write the rest of your introduction. So that's a step one, finding evidence, classifying evidence, determining if it's positive or negative, and then moving from there. Once you develop your thesis, it's important to understand that on the outline, your thesis will be the only sentence that appears. However, when you create the full essay, you need to go back and complete the introduction and conclusion paragraphs for the completed essay. And I will have instructions on what should be included in those as you move into that step next week. Okay? Step two is the bulk of you finding the evidence. And we're actually going to spend a large amount of time finding this in class. But your job is use this entire section as your checklist of worksheets and elements that you need to find in order to collect your evidence. For World War II, I'm going to ask you to look at the Japanese internment web activity, the America Story of Us documentary notes, a specs from your World War II scopes project that you did. You should have a note-taking sheet as well as your own notes, and a specs on the atomic bomb from the atomic bomb debate that we did. For the Cold War era, I'm calling it early Cold War era, you're going to find a specs on an event that escalated the start of the Cold War, which would be either the fall of China, the detonation of the atomic bomb by the Soviet Union, or the Korean War. Or I want you to find the specs from the height of the Red Scare. That would come from your specs, the Red Scare prompt that you did as practice for this essay. That could be a McCarthy quote, HUAC actions, government propaganda, Dennis versus the United States, the Rosenberg case, etc. Choose one of those specs. Then I want you to choose a specs from Cuba, which is either from the Bay of Pigs or the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then we'll branch into the Vietnam War. I want you to include an element of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which comes from your Vietnam homework. I want a topic from the round robin read that we did in groups, from My Lai, Tet Offensive, the draft, or Johnson resigns and Nixon's elected. And then I want a specs from the Nixon and Vietnam worksheet. So each of these are activities that we've been doing over the course of the last several weeks. And now you're going to piece together all of this evidence and put it into a nice, well-developed essay. For the outline for step 3, you will develop a sentence that restates the thesis, and the remainder of the closing paragraph you will get instructions on later this week. Remember, the restatement of a thesis does not mean repeat, it means restate. Okay, so then you'll notice when you go on to the next page that you will actually see the outline in its entirety. I'm going to provide you with the first page of instructions as a handout, so you have a paper copy in front of you. But if you notice, this section, A, matches up with this section of your outline. Now, your World War II section, you're going to notice that there are 4 elements that you're going to be looking at. For the other 2, you'll be looking at 3. So what you're going to do is you would match up this A, specs and analysis, to the Japanese internment section. And what you would do in A is you would describe what is Japanese internment, what happened to the Japanese Americans. You would introduce whatever the specs is you're going to talk about. So if you use a quote, a picture, you need to explain it. So you need to say, like, Mary Tsukamoto stated in 1941, and then your specs would give what quote that she stated. And your analysis should explain, based on this evidence choice that you chose, how does that prove the thesis correct? So my A statement would be like, Japanese internment was when Japanese Americans were rounded up after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and placed into internment camps in the western part of the United States. My specs might be Mary Tsukamoto, an internee in 1941, stated that, and then I would give her quote. And I would say this, through Mary's words, this impacted her psychological opportunity in a negative way because, and then I would explain why. Okay. So it's exactly what you've been doing for practice all trimester, but this time you're going to put it into a well-developed essay. Then you're going to go on to your B, specs and analysis, and that will match up with 2, which is America, the Story of Us documentary notes. Your B would need to describe whatever it is you're going to talk about. So if you're talking about the Jeep, you'd have to describe what the Jeep is. Your specs would describe how it was used in warfare, and your analysis would explain whether or not it was a positive or negative technological opportunity. And then you're going to go forward from there. So the most important thing to remember as you complete your war essay is to take it step by step and to piece together all of these elements that are required. At the conclusion of this, you will turn this into a well-developed essay, which means you'll have to include transitional words and phrases. You'll have to start and end your proof paragraphs with sentences. You can also turn this into several paragraphs beyond the traditional 3. I have 3 specified sections, but it doesn't mean that these all have to be clumped together into one mega paragraph. This might be its own paragraph, your A, specs and analysis. In that case, though, you can't end a paragraph on an analysis. You'd actually have to close it and lead into your B statement. So just bear in mind that you're going to have to think carefully about how you create this with the things such as your introduction and closing to paragraphs. All right, that's the tutorial. All the best of luck, and I hope you do well. Let me know if you have any questions.